throat, get all that shit going. Hello, welcome to the PiG Daily, guys. It's episode number 103, and today we're going to be talking about carriers. It's something I didn't want to talk about too much. Everyone's like, for weeks now, since the patch came out, they're like, talk about carriers, how do I beat carriers? And I was kind of like, I don't know, man, just don't let them get there, build things that shoot up. You know, it's something I wasn't too keen on talking about. Number one, because I hadn't seen that many games against it at pro level. I hadn't played that many games against it. But now I've played against it a whole bunch. And we have a great series which shows us a bunch of carrier games from IEM Gyonji. So I wanted to take a look and actually dissect a little bit of one specific way of dealing with carriers, which is Hydra Baneling. And we see this in Byul's games versus stats from the semi-finals of IEM Gyonji. So let's dive into game here. I don't care about the early games and what's going on with them. And I mean, keep in mind, guys, it's always going to come back to this. I guess before we get too deep on this, how the hell do you stop carriers, right? How do you stop them? What's the number one response you're going to get whenever you're talking about how do you stop carriers? The number one response you're going to get from people is just don't let them get there. Don't fuck up your opening. Don't fall too far behind. If you fall too far behind, you're just dead. And that's all absolutely valid advice. It really is. It's basically people saying, well, you know what? Carriers are a high-tech unit. They're powerful. If you are way behind and then your opponent gets up to them, it's like, well, you know, it's basically just letting your opponent get ahead. And the general answer to, oh, how do you beat your opponent when they're ahead in StarCraft is like, well, there's a few things you can do to potentially come back. But you know what the best thing to focus on is? Not letting them get ahead in the first place. So yes, you don't want to take massive damage in the openings. You don't want to get completely wrecked. But keep in mind, because carriers, even though they're very powerful in a frontal fight, you can always come back against them because they're very slow, they're very immobile. And just generally, you know, there are always ways to potentially make your way back into a game as long as your opponent doesn't play absolutely perfectly. And guess what? No one plays perfectly in StarCraft. It's not really a thing. So this is a great example of that particular point right there, because check out the supply right now. The guy going carriers who has a casual 11 Phoenix flying around killing endless drones, oh, he's up 20 supply at the 8-minute mark. Yes, Zerg has fourth base on the way. Guess what? Protoss here has 3 bases fully saturated. He's actually got too many workers in the main. He can like go for a 4th soon. He's already got carriers on the way. He's making a mothership. Stats is in a fantastic position this game. The openings went really well for him. Byul took a long time to scout what was going on in the early game. Basically, he was very worried about his gold base, and he's taken a lot of damage. It's up to 32 workers killed. Byul's in a terrible position right now. It sucks, right? Like, normally you'd say just going for some sort of frontal Hydra attack will never work if you have had this sort of opening. However, in this game it is going to work. So let's fast forward a bit. Let's focus on a few important things. If you want to play Hydra Baneling against carriers, you've got to go double upgrades. Why? Because Carapace is freaking incredible. Because you're massing shitloads of Hydras and you're going to be taking multiple engagements. Getting ranged upgrades is also fantastic. They do a lot of damage, you know, an attack. They shoot very fast. Getting a bit of damage, it just incrementally makes the Hydras a little bit stronger. Carapace, on the other hand, though, is massive. And the reason for that is carriers have 2 attacks. Each one does a very low damage point. And each Carapace, each point of armor, will hence block an extra damage point because it blocks the each of the Interceptor's attacks. So, you know, if you ever get ahead in Carapace upgrades especially, then Interceptors start to do almost no damage. I played a game on ladder where I thought I messed up really badly, and this guy had like 8 carriers, and then I had 2-2, and I was like, oh, I'm probably dead, you know, I've taken too long. And I remember just A-moving this guy, and his Interceptors just did nothing. And then I realized, I was like, oh, he has no attack upgrades on his carriers. I have +2 Carapace on my Hydras. His Interceptors are doing like 3 damage a shot, and I'm like, huh. And my Hydras just weren't dying. I just like rolled over the top, all the Interceptors disappeared, and he died. So upgrades are massive when it comes to this sort of army, guys. Get those double upgrades, makes a big difference. And you also don't want to go too insanely high on drones, usually. You can go crazy high on drones, but you're never going to take a front-on fight if you do. The reason is you just won't have enough army supply, and you really want to have a bigger army supply than the Protoss. You want to be kind of hitting when you're about maxed out, sometimes a little bit before then. and well before the Protoss is maxed out. Now, this is one of these games where stats is like, even in supply because the opening's been so shit for Byul. But normally you want to hit before they're maxed out. You want to be just kind of, if you got 85 drones rather than say the 70 drones we see here, that's 7 or 8 less Hydralisks in the big battle. That's a bit too much. It just weakens your army. So if you go for that massive drone count, you need to focus on the opponent's economy a bit more. And you need to say, oh, drop 20 Hydras in the back. When his army pulls back to defend, your frontal army jumps in the front here, snipes the Nexus and pulls back. You're doing those kind of hit and run tactics. Now, that's always a little bit of a, I don't know if it's riskier necessarily, but that's more of a desperate approach to fighting carriers because you're hoping to catch them out of position. If the carrier player is really good at splitting their army, building lots of cannons, maybe using DTs to help defend, sometimes that multi-prong can go incredibly wrong because your army, being all split up, it's a little bit vulnerable. However, if you're playing that super high drone count, or especially if they're doing a style where they just mass carriers and they don't have ground support. You see those guys who just build like 56 cannons at their 4th base or their 3rd base at the front on like Echo or a map where it's really choked up, and they just sit there and they're like, I'm never going to move out. And they like take a 4th base before they even put the Nexus down. They build a pylon and just build 12 cannons. And you're like, oh my fucking God. So if you're playing against those guys, yeah, go to that high drone count and just fucking YOLO drops behind them, Nidus Worms, whatever you can do. Avoid the carriers, avoid the cannons, hit their economy, play that style, sure. But in this case, we're going to be seeing much more of a frontal focus style. And we're about to see the first attack here. Now, Banelings, not really necessary if your opponent doesn't have any ground army. Or cannons. However, if they've got cannons, notice the cannons will always be clumped up. Sorry guys, it's kind of hard to get an angle on these cannons. You can see there's like 4 cannons there, another cannon there. They're always going to be clumped up so that they're all covering each other so that the Hydras can't isolate them. And that means they're exposed to Banelings. Banelings will be able to clear the cannons very quickly. Most importantly though, Adepts combined with the carriers is super popular. So you want to have those Banelings to roll in and just wreck them. Later on, when they get High Templar with Storm, it's very important to be able to just run in and kill all the High Templar or force the High Templar to run away, allowing your Hydras to engage in reasonably big clumps as we see here. So in this particular fight, we're going to see something really interesting. So let me just slow this down. What happens is Stats sees the Banelings and goes, oh shit, and he tries to pull all of his Adepts back here multiple times. So he goes forward again, he's like, oh, and he goes, oh shit, there's more Banelings coming in. Ugh, and he actually takes some terrible hits there. He sees even more Banelings coming, and he pulls them back again. For the vast majority of this fight, those Adepts weren't actually engaging at all. All they did was shoot a few Banelings, most of which still got decent detonations on the Adepts. And it was just the carriers fighting the Hydras. And because the Hydras weren't worried about those Adepts on top of them, because the Adepts were pulling back out of Hydra range, the Hydras were free to engage simply by A, moving and shooting down all the interceptors. And you see, once the interceptors are gone, the carriers are like, shit, run! Hydras chase down one of those carriers, get the Oracle, and then they're just going to pull back and snipe the Nexus. So this is something really interesting. Keep in mind, guys, Byul was way down on supply. He was hitting at like max versus max. How the shit did he win this? Aren't carriers the ultimate unit? Keep in mind, as I was saying before, this is a very different scenario to someone who just builds cannons and carriers and is like, I hope this guy doesn't drop me. You know, this is what I would say is kind of the more solid carrier style, in that you're more protected against the very fast Hydra attacks, the very fast Hydra Baneling attacks, because you've got these Adepts, these more solid ground units, you can warp in lots of them. What's the downside? The downside is that you don't have that many carriers up. He delayed his Storm so long. And the fight suddenly becomes very important in terms of how you micro it. So I do feel like Stats could have won this engagement. Let me talk about how. So let's go back just a little bit. And let's say, keep in mind, if the Protoss plays perfectly, if they've got this much of a lead, I still think he should always win. Even though, yes, his carriers weren't out that early. He's only got 4 carriers right now. 4 carriers, that's not that many, right? He's got 3 more on the way. He's got a 5th flying over here from his main base. You know, this is a pretty nice attack by Byul because he's got his 2-1 upgrades. And there's only a few carriers here, right? But there's a huge Adept count. Now, I think part of the problem here is Stats didn't really realize that this attack was coming in. And the way he uses his army, I feel, is a little bit wrong for this situation. the way he tries to kind of pull back from the Banelings, I think is maybe not the most effective thing. Ultimately, I think you need to be able to engage into the Hydralisks all at once. And I'd love to see if any pro gamers disagree with this idea. If they're like, no, actually, I think what Stats did was right. He just needed force fields, or he just needed Storm earlier, or he should have abandoned the 4th base and pulled back. Maybe so. But for now, I mean, logically, what we end up seeing here is these Adepts don't fight. What if the Adepts are pre-spread in a bit more of a battle line? You just kind of spread them all out so the Banelings can't just get those money hits, but then you're actually engaging with them with your force at the same time, so that they, the Banelings either all have to engage at once, or the Adepts are hitting the Hydras, and Adepts tear through Hydralisks pretty quickly. The Hydras are wasting their damage on the Adepts rather than the Interceptors. That makes such a big difference, because look at that first pullback. Now, what you want to look whenever you're analyzing these fights, and this is something people often forget to do in replays, open up the units tab, check the interceptor count, because that tells you how scary these carriers are. There's a big difference between carriers full of interceptors and carriers that just had to pull back and waste all their interceptors. So check this out. So we've got 30 interceptors, 35, 36. Okay. So we've got 4 full carriers here, 36 interceptors. But notice they go forward, they launch quite a few interceptors there. They all just get sniped down. Yeah, here we go. More interceptors launch. They're all getting sniped down. They kill a couple Hydralisks, but then he has to pull back his whole army again. All the interceptors pull back in, and he's lost all of his interceptors. So because he kind of fought, pulled back, the carriers ended up a lot less effective because the Adepts weren't fighting at the same time as the interceptors. And the Adepts simply, didn't really help the army. And you've got to keep in mind, guys, that Banelings here don't really cost that much for the Zerg. And what I mean is, obviously, Banelings are an expensive unit. But with just make like 20, 30 Banelings, the Zerg has completely negated this huge investment in Adepts on the ground, because the Adepts weren't kind of spread out at all. And they were just like, oh shit, just run away. And, they had to rely on the carriers and everything and their own attacks to try to shoot down these Banelings. And suddenly all the interceptors are gone. However, think about Banelings from the Zerg's perspective. Zerg here is playing a front-on style. He doesn't have a massive drone count. He needs to knock down that carrier count before it gets too high. He's got to do damage. And then as the Protoss player, Stats is like pulling back with his Adepts and kind of wasting a bit of time here. And the thing is that those Banelings cost no money, because you've got this money mining. Normally you're building Hydras, right? It takes a lot of time to spend the money on the Hydras and walk them across the map. I'm explaining this point in a very roundabout way, by the way. But basically, you can just be like, oh, I've got 30 Zerglings. Morph them into Banelings. 15 seconds later, you've got 30 Banelings. Roll them into the fight. So Banelings are very good for these frontal timing attacks, because you can dump the money super quickly into the unit and then just roll them in. And they're very supply efficient as well. Each Baneling, still only half a supply, the same as a Zergling, but obviously much more useful than a single Zergling in these engagements. So Banelings are one of these very few super supply efficient units, which buff out the max of Zerg a lot. You can invest the money in it right before the engagement, and you still have a massive Hydralisk army behind it. So that's why the Banelings are just so useful here. And this is kind of the weakness of going for this army as Protoss, but it's also something where, like I said, if Protoss has Storm, if Protoss has his Adepts spread out a bit more, things could look a bit different. That being said, if Byul wasn't so far behind early on, he's just going to have enough units that he's always going to hit, hopefully before there's too many Adepts, that he's always going to hit before there's Storm or too many carriers. And I do feel like if the Zerg has an even opening and the Protoss rushes up to carriers, off 2 Stargate Oracle or 2 Stargate Phoenix like this, I feel like there's a very high likelihood that the Zerg can, consistently find this sort of window to make this attack work. Is it going to work every game? Is it the most perfect way to play every single situation? No, I'm never saying that. You've always got to analyze each game in its own stead. But this was a great example of a game where, it was incredible. It was like, how the frack did Byul get into this position? And Byul wins the game from here. He does make a really bad attack here, so this is a good example of what not to do. Right after you take that trade, notice he was very careful to not keep chasing those carriers, because those interceptors cost next to nothing, and he knows there's more carriers coming out, he knows there's more units warping in. The moment you overextend with Hydras, they get completely owned. So he was like, no, just kill the base, wait until I've added more Banelings, wait until I've added more Hydras, and then go. But then he seems to forget that patience here. He gets, this is what I like to call getting a little bit horny. It's basically like, he's like frothing at the mouth or some shit. He's like, let's fucking kill him. Everyone makes this decision. You guys have all made this at home. I do this on a daily basis where I'm like, nah, I can just kill him. And you kind of forget your entire logical thought process right before that, where you're like, no, let's wait until I have all the pieces and then attack. And this is where we see a freaking terrible attack, man. This is so bad. He's like, I have 2 Banelings. All right, I've got a decent Hydra count. This is okay. And then he's like, oh, wait, now we get to see the power of the Adepts when they're actually all just kind of engaging into the Hydralisks at the same time as the Interceptors, at the same time as the Phoenix. No Banelings equals Adepts are going to ruin your day. They're a cheap unit. They do very well versus Hydras and Zerglings, especially when combined with the high damage output of the carriers. The high damage output and the meatiness of the Adepts on top of that just totally routs this Zerg army. And Byul here, suddenly, remember we talked about how they were very similar in supply, in work count before. He's actually just made this game kind of close. Now, the reason it ends up still being fine for Byul just comes back to the fact that there's no 4th base for stats. So you can look at work account, that's misleading. What's more important is income. And you can see that because Byul has got fresh mining bases to spread his workers across, while stats' freshest base is oversaturated, his main is empty, his natural's only got a couple mineral patches, he's actually got shit all mining going. So losing the 4th base for such a long time ended up really hurting stats. Even that second Hydra attack, even though it didn't do damage, it still kept stats off a 4th base. So in a way, it still achieved something. And Byul here is able to rebuild his army size much quicker. And we see, like, the Templar Archives is finally coming in. Stats is like, oh shit, I need something much more efficient to deal with this army. He tries to make sentries here in desperation to, like, force field out the Banelings. And he's making Archons, trying to add in anything. Doesn't quite work out. He's gonna attack, and he's actually gonna get overwhelmed, even though the army supply is very similar. Yeah, he's frozen up on making carriers as well, because he's like, oh shit, I think maybe if I just attack now, maybe I can do this. Maybe if he just defended and turtled it up and added Storm, he might have still been able to come back in this game, specifically because of that big overextension with that attack that Byul made without the Banelings. So it's interesting thinking about it from both sides. This was definitely not the cleanest series. It's something where, pro games, carriers, still not something we've seen a lot of. The players themselves are making a lot of mistakes still. Like, where was the recall in this fight? He could have saved 2 or 3 carriers. Why is he re-engaging with only a few interceptors? I guess he's desperate to keep the 4th alive, but I think he's actually lucky that Byul turns around here. Byul maybe not quite realizing that the interceptors were completely out. Also not wanting to repeat his mistake from before of going in without Banelings. So probably the correct decision from Byul. And yeah, Byul's just going to wait for extra Banelings, morph all of those, and then he says, yeah, all those ground units you're making, kind of worthless, not really going to do anything against me. And he will push in one more time. Once again, clumped up cannons, guys. I kind of feel like against this composition, you actually do want to spread your cannons out more just because the Banelings are so good against them. But you see how powerful Hydras are. If you don't have your cannons together, the Hydras can just snipe them down pretty quick. So it's easy to see why players are doing it this way. Just too much Zerg, man. GG's. Cool, cool, cool. Alright, so that's an interesting game. Please shout out your questions in chat, by the way. I do want to say a big thanks to all you guys subbing and everything. I'll give you guys specific shout outs after the show. I'm going to look at one more game as well, where I'm going to look at the high economy situation, where it's like, oh shit, Protoss has 10 carriers, he's got Storm, what the fuck do I do with Hydras and Banelings? And we get to see a game which is surprisingly close in that scenario. So I've got to fast forward through the replay to get it up to the point where carriers are actually out. But as I was saying, guys, it's a little bit different with the Banelings, right? If your opponent just makes carriers, just makes cannons, Banelings not as effective. However, if they make High Templar, still Banelings are very effective because you want to roll them in, even if they're cloaked under the Mothership Core. You come in with like speed overseers with your army as well, and you just kind of like blow up the High Templar so your Hydras can YOLO in. And that can actually be super effective as well. However, if they've only got air units, obviously suddenly Banelings don't make that much sense. But just generally, no Adepts in the army, no Storm in the army. You know, the less ground support, but especially the less Adepts or Charge Lots joined in, the much less mobility that the Protoss player has. And less mobility for the Protoss equals you can just counterattack. You can start using drops a lot more. That's something especially if you're not playing at pro level. Fuck, man, drops are like how to kill carrier play. You just pick up 20 Hydras and drop them in their like back base where their army's furthest away from, and then when they pull back to defend, you hit the front. It's like it seriously wins me all of my games against carriers. I'm just like, yeah, I'm just gonna drop some Hydras here, and as long as I'm not too far behind, it's like, yeah, well, that worked really well. It's very hard as the Protoss player to actually be in the right position. It's one of these situations in StarCraft where we're like, the Protoss is in an unlosable situation, and we kind of like say things in absolutes like that a lot of the time in StarCraft. And then you watch this game and the Protoss loses it, and it's like, well, I guess this Protoss is really shit at StarCraft and doesn't know how to play. And it's like, not really. It's just that, you know what? He's human, and he made a mistake with his positioning once, and the other guy was really good at hitting 3 or 4 locations at once, and suddenly, you know, he's up shit creek without a paddle. And you know what? When you're scooping poop with your hands to try and paddle around shit creek, it's not going to be the best situation. So this game is a lot more in the favor of Byul from the early game, guys, and that's why this one's also interesting as well. So same situation, the same adept carrier sort of style. It was interesting that Stats, he lost game 1 from a great position. He actually ends up winning this game from a shit position. He lost all of his adepts on his first glaive adept pressure, which was his opening, and his third was like mega delayed. So he's only now trying to establish a fourth, and he's down, heaps in supply. He's only, once again, he's caught with only 4 carriers. He's got 3 about to pop. He's got +2 about to finish for his air weapons. He's got Graviton Catapult halfway done. He's got +1 weapons almost finished. He's like at this point where his army is like, oh, can you just give me another 30 to 40 seconds, please? And Byul's like, no, I'm maxed. It's time for me to mess your shit up. I really do feel like Byul actually made a big mistake. Maybe he didn't realize how far ahead he was in not just crushing his way down here. Either send some units there and most of your units down this ramp, or split your army half there, and just push through. I feel like he needed to trade right now. And while Byul does kill the 4th base, because he's not killing the army units, it's kind of more important to kill the army. If you possibly can, because Byul's not teching up. He's only now adding an infestation. He does have, once again, 2-1 upgrades. Does need to start his +2 carapace as well. But you can see here he's dilly-dallying. He's been maxed. He needs to go. You need to go right now. His Banelings here, this time, once again, look at that. All the Banelings not as effective. The Adepts this time were pre-spread. We saw Stats here play this so much better. Look at this. Look at this beautiful pre-spread on his Adepts. They're all spread out, because he knows this time around he needs to have his units not all pulling back once. He almost panicked. You saw that. He pulled his units back. He clicked them back and was like, wait, no, hold position. He almost did the panic, pull the units away from the 8 Banelings, and then he realized he was doing the same mistake he did in the previous game, changed his mind, loses just a sentry and a few Adepts, and then his Adepts can walk forward. And yeah, he's already lost a shitload of Interceptors to the Hydras, but he's got some force fields. His Adepts are closing in with the Hydras. He's actually able to take a really good fight here. So I think Byul here let his Banelings maybe get a little bit too far in front of his Hydras. Stats with his positioning, really great positioning there. So Byul maybe needed a few more Banelings in the composition. I think an extra 10 Banelings or even 15 Banelings. They're so supply efficient. If your opponent's making a lot of Adepts like Stats is here, you actually want a pretty insane amount of Banelings to just crash on through. And one of the big advantages as well, if you have too many of them, is sometimes after killing the ground units, you can just run into a mineral line. And even if you don't win the fight outright, that can actually work out very well. So anyway, from here, guys, I'm going to fast forward through, because like I said, I want to talk about something else, which is high economy. And this is that situation where, okay, yes, Byul's going to cancel the... No, thought he was going to cancel the 4th. He gets some good Baneling detonations this time, but once again, Stats much better on the spread, rather than just pulling all his units away from the fight. As soon as the Banelings are gone, the Adepts are in the battle, they're doing damage, they're buffering. I'm actually not sure what the Hydra attack priority is, if it's for Interceptors or for Adepts. I think it's for them to hit Adepts first. I'm not 100% sure. But the Adepts being there, dishing out damage is definitely very important. And basically now Byul's like, well, that didn't go too well. He has a 4th base now, and I'm fucked. So he just adds a lot of drones here. He's like, this is that desperate situation I was talking about, guys, where they've got a shitload of carriers up. What is that? We got 9 carriers, more on the way, Storms on the way, +3 weapons is on the way. You know, you've let the Protoss get up to that point where he has a secure 4th and he has an army you simply cannot beat in a front-on engagement. However, Hydras are a mobile unit. So we're going to see Byul do that thing where he's like, let's just drone up to that really high drone count. Let's go up to like 80 drones. So he's just continuing to add in small numbers of drones, lots of bases, and then look for the multi-prong. He had some Vipers here, which is a cute addition. See if you can, catch some of these units. But for the most part, he's just going to be like, try to split my army up and deny bases and catch him in a really shitty position. Because my army cannot stand up to this. Archons, High Templar with Storm, massive carriers, perfect Hydra Baneling killing army. So he's splitting off some units on the south. He's been trying to run Banelings into mineral lines. Actually, earlier on this game, he did a little run by down here where Speed Banes ran into that mineral line and wrecked a lot of probes. So he's had a few cool moments. Ooh, see, he abducted the mothership core. So this is good. He's been rotating his army up and down, up and down. And you watch from Stats Vision, Stats is like, fuck, move up, move down, move up, move down. He's kind of like, I've got to be in position. Can't let him just run past and kill my base. And just a moment of inattention here. Mothership a little bit exposed. Great snipe by Byul. This is really cool, cute stuff. Now, the big thing I've got to be critical of for Byul here is he's giving Stats too much time. Remember what I was talking about, guys? This army's unkillable, right? If it's so unkillable, it's so powerful, like, buying time and getting a big economy isn't going to win you the game. Just having a bigger economy doesn't help. You've got to actually do damage, but you've got to swap. Rather than killing the army, you're still on a timer. You've still got to do damage sooner rather than later. Or the Protoss can build a perfect army, build more cannons, and it just becomes easier as time goes on for the Protoss to be very carefully taking the right engagement where he kills your entire army supply and you kill an Archon and 2 carriers and you're like, yeah, I killed like 800 resources for 6,000. Hydralisk's not that great against Mass Storm Carrier. So you've got to start mass dropping, multi-pronging, hitting multiple angles. And this is a really hard map for it, which is a big reason why Byul struggles. Grabbing a mothership is great, but it's not enough. He really needs to split his army better and start hitting these mineral lines. He needs to send drops down the south and hit here with Baneling drops or Hydra drops. He needs to 6 Dropper Lords into the main base, snipe down the Stargates with a bunch of Hydralisks dropped. He needs to start doing that, and that can work very well against this army because there's no mobility. These Archons probably can't even get through that wall into the main base. They definitely can't get past that. Even if they could get through that wall, they'd have to go to get back up there. Carriers are very slow. There's a couple of Adepts. They're not going to do that well against a big drop. So I definitely think Byul here kind of froze up a little bit and just got kind of stuck in this like, oh, let's hope he does a really shitty attack, which I can jump on top of. And he's banking resources, but resources aren't really going to help him. He's getting Adrenal. He's finally getting +2 carapace. He's got +3 range, but he takes far too long to split his army and multi-prong. And by never using drops, he allows Stats to use the strength of the map. He can just kind of defend this point and then this point. And the problem with threatening here on the ground is your army needs to go deep. You need to go up that ramp, and if they come back from behind, your army gets trapped here. It's very hard to retreat. He's doing a good job now, running in, sniping the attempts to take a 5th. And he definitely kind of almost does insane damage here. Like you see here, he threatens there, tries to go forward. As the army pulls back, these Hydralisks on the south push in, snipe the Nexus, run away. These are the little moves you got to do, but now that Stats has an insane economy, he's got an insane army, it's not really going to be enough. So, I'm going to finish up in just a minute, guys. Let's fast forward through and I can show you guys the horrible things which happen if you don't hit that timing, if you don't find a moment to do damage, if you don't find that window before the Protoss player has a huge bank and an insane army. And this is example 1 of what happens. Oh yeah, I split my army. This should be good. Bit scary going in here. Yeah, okay, I'll put a Hydra ahead to check, see if there's units coming back. Let's do it, okay. We'll probably better run away, but this army can go in, right? Oh, goodbye, 20-30 army supply. Oh, God, didn't kill anything for that. Stats has, started to split up his carriers. He's got High Templar and Archons in multiple places. He's warping in charge lots to buy a little bit of time as well and to keep the pressure away from him. He's getting masses of cannons down here. And stuff gets really gross. This goes for another 8 minutes, so Hydras keep looking for it, but without drops, without the extra mobility, can't really do it. And I'm just going to find that one big final fight where the disgusting shit happens. Would Vipers be good versus carriers? Not really, because so basically the Vipers are good for grabbing that one exposed unit on the rotation, right? When the Protoss isn't looking. But normally at high levels, High Templar will just feedback everything, so they don't really work out too well. You definitely can potentially add Corruptors in. Problem is, Storm and Archons are so amazing against Corruptors, and Corruptors don't really add that ground counterattack versatility that Hydras have. Hydras can do a lot of stuff. Did I say versatility? That's great, I just made up a word. They don't have that versatility. See here, grabbing a unit is great with the Vipers, but it's not enough. Byul really needs to be damaging the economy, doing more direct damage. So I'm just going to find the fight while I put back on my face. So anyway, guys, any other questions in chat? Let me see. Is it worth using Infestors in these fights with the Hydras, says Boolia. Personally, it's exceptionally hard to do. Definitely, if the game went long enough, it seems like it might be an okay choice. Why does it seem like an okay choice? Because you can lock down interceptors. If the interceptors all launch on one exposed, say there's like one Hydralisk in front of your army or like a small clump, and all the interceptors shoot on this one point, then yeah, if you like land a fungal, chain another fungal, you potentially could kill like 30, 40 interceptors, and that could be great. Problem is, how often do all the interceptors shoot the same thing? How often do you land that fungal and chain it just perfectly while worrying about spreading against storms and microing your banelings into High Templar? It almost never happens, and it costs a shitload of gas. It's a big investment, which all takes away from your immediate army. The problem is those Infestors, you can't force them to be useful. They're one of these units where when you're stuck in a weird defensive position and you're looking for edges, that's great. Maybe they'll find a good trade, but usually there's too much time that goes by in between, and time is exactly what you don't want to give a Protoss player going carriers. Like I said, you want to either be hitting that hard Baneling Hydra timing and getting in there and stopping the fourth and trading against his army and killing carriers, killing his ground units, or you want to be dropping his mineral lines and killing his production and his economy. You've got to do that before their army gets too powerful, or this happens. And this is going to be the big fight we're looking for. You know, Stats is a little bit, he's mostly clumped together with his army. He's got cannons and stuff, but look at this. Basically, Byul has added in Ultras. He's like, look, let's just wipe out the ground army absolutely by having like too many Ultras and Banelings. And even if I don't have enough Hydras, I can at least wipe out part of his army, and then I can remax on Hydras or Corruptors, something that can kill the carriers. And we see here, those High Templar were kind of caught in the front of the army a bit. So they're like spamming storms, running away from these ground units like, shit. We can't really get in range of storming those Hydras. Uh-oh. A couple of ducks went down on some carriers as well. Mothership doesn't really have enough units to kill them though. But the ground army is getting wrecked here, and units are starting to get in that mineral line as well, which is of course very big. The queens have been pulled in as well. Byul is actually doing massive damage to the economy, even though the carriers, unfortunately, the big problem for him is the carriers are still standing strong. There's going to be 6 carriers that survive this engagement, which is, even though he killed a lot, that's pretty decent for Stats. And Stats keeps the base alive, even though he's lost a lot of workers. He's still got this base half mining. This base doesn't have enough probes for it, but he could be full mining. But during all that, these charge lots wiped out a base up there. And that was really the most important base for Byul, because Byul's been mining more of the map out. So Byul here, he's got this base here, he's got a couple mineral patches here, but Byul is got one last remax in him, and that's about it. And the problem here is that Stats has kept most of his army alive. And because the Ultras have been shown, and there's still a lot of money dumped into Ultras, the problem is, Stats knows this, Stats is pumping out Immortals 2 at a time. So those Ultras are going to be pretty much dead supply. Because Immortals will just focus fire them and they won't really achieve anything in the engagement. So because he couldn't remax instantly, couldn't just go for another fight, he got supply blocked and so on by losing a lot of Overseers in those engagements. That's the power of the Mothership as well. It forces a lot of gas into those Overseers, which the Zerg player really doesn't want to be wasting their money on. We see here, nice adduct on that carrier. You know, he's looking for these angles. You can't really find the frontal engage, but at the end of it, Stats is going to win this out. So Hydra Baneling didn't work out this game. The Adept defense on the ground was really good at that attack. Definitely we saw Byul not have enough Banelings with his attack. His Banelings blew up. They weren't microed well enough. His Hydras didn't come in at the same time as the Banelings, and messing up that one big timing attack screwed him over. From there, he played this game really well. He kept looking for those angles over and over again, trying to find them. But because he didn't use drops, because it's a very tight map and there wasn't that much space for Stats to cover, Stats just defended really well and made quick work of him. So we're going to see the one last engagement. Man, This fucking replay needs to hurry up. Okay, here we go. And here we see the final mistake. If you are not actually able to find the window to do drop damage, you will sometimes be able to remax on this sort of army. And if you're ever trying to fight with mass Hydra, even if you've got ultras in there, a lot of the time you say, I can't just attack into that on his terms. If he just pushes into the middle of creep and I can surround his army 360, I can kill this army. But guess what? Stats is a good player. He's not going to make that mistake. And this is where Byul makes a classic mistake. We all do this in high pressure situations. I did this just the other day in the exact same, I was playing the exact same style where I was like, counterattack with Hydras, hope he attacks on creep. And right at this moment, he splits off like 20 Hydralisks down here. What is this? 17 Hydras, an Ultra, couple Banelings, a Queen. Sends it off to counterattack while threatening up here. And this is great because Stats doesn't see this. Stats doesn't know that army is rotating. And it's going to dive on the last bit of economy and wipe it out. This is a sick maneuver. The problem is this takes away a lot of strength from an already questionable army. Like I said, this army can only really beat the Protoss army if he comes deep on creep and you surround it. You definitely cannot defend this location. Byul here, though, was trying to make it look like he had his whole army here, like he was ready to take a fight. And he reacts a little bit slowly. Stats says, you know what? I can take a one-directional engagement even if your whole army's here. You can't really flank me in this tight area. And Byul makes a terrible decision and engages rather than running. He should just pull his whole army to the left. Down those 17 Hydras, that Ultra, his army's way too small here. He doesn't have that surround that I was talking about that he really needs. There's not enough Banelings to clear up the charge lots, to clear up the High Templar. And he drops like 40 army, about 30 army supply there, maybe a bit more. A lot of units go down. So even though he snipes the economy, it's a sort of Pyrrhic victory because he threw away too many units on the top at the same time and is going to lose his base. So they end up trading the most important mining base of each player, but Byul also lost way too much army, which he can't replace. And now they're at equal army supply. We already talked about how Stats' army is better. Byul gets desperate here and he goes for one exceptionally desperate engagement. Immortals, Archons, and Storm, all engaging along with the Interceptors. Those Interceptors can just replenish here for free. Doesn't matter how many Interceptors you kill. Even though Stats has one Mineral Patch mining, that's enough to build about 300 Interceptors. So they cost almost nothing at the moment. And we see the last engagement. Very well played by Stats. One really important mistake there from Byul. I think if he pulled that army back, he might have been able to play this out. And that's incredible, because he was fucked. He was so fucked. But you can always make these comebacks happen with Hydra Baneling, with any sort of mobile composition against the very immobile carriers. So, I don't know. I just think that's really cool that we saw Byul be so wrecked in the opening of game one, come back and win it. He was actually ahead in that game, messed up his timing attack. We saw how Stats did everything right to bring it back, even though he was behind in the early game. But then Byul still had opportunities. So even though definitely you're on a timer against carriers, things do get worse and worse as the Zerg player as time goes on if you're not able to do damage. There's always ways to use positioning to your advantage, to outposition the Protoss player, and to find these timing windows to do aggressive damage. So yeah, thank you so much for hanging out, guys. I don't think there's any other questions in chat. One last question. Ali says, wouldn't it be nice to add 2 spies? Remax with Corruptors when you have 1-1 or 2-2 air upgrades. Definitely there's like the potential of that if you have an insane economy, Ali. In this game, for instance, Byul never really had that high drone count. And remember what I said, that the problem is that's incredibly expensive and the Corruptors can't fight the ground army. So the problem is you can build like 30 Corruptors and you're like, yeah! And then they're like, oh, you know what? Like I added 6 Void Rays into my army. Or I've got 4 Archons and I've got Storm. And unless you have like a sick 360 surround with your Corruptors spread, they're going to take so much damage from the Archons and Storm or the Void Rays charging up. So it can get very awkward using Corruptors. You definitely can potentially add Corruptors in. That's a fine way to play. Not really what I was focusing on today because I was talking a lot more about this Hydra Baneling style. And I do think it's most powerful when you do it like Byul. You stay on that 70 drones, that nice just gases on the 4th base, transition drones onto the minerals as you run out of patches. But no more drones than that. Just the 70 drones is plenty. And play it out, you know, trying to hit that aggressive timing. And only if the game drags on or you're in a bad position, you're like, shit, I need to go to the higher drone count, I need to play it out. Then you can start thinking about going towards Spire and Corruptors. But we saw the way Byul played that with Hydraling, Baneling, adding Ultras in potentially. You can make it work just with that composition. So it's up to you, your own style. You can also just go straight for a Corruptor timing. Some people like to just go Lingbane Corruptor. And that can work as well. There's a lot of different options in StarCraft always. I never say like StarCraft's a game where you just have one way to fight something. StarCraft's a game of options above everything else. I always welcome, criticism as well, guys. So if you're like, no, Hydra Baneling is terrible, stats just did this wrong, feel free, go ahead, post it up in chat, on the forums, and YouTube comments, wherever. If you post it on the TL thread or the Discord or something, we can usually have a much better discussion there, because I don't get a chance to read every single YouTube comment lately. But anyway, guys, thanks for hanging out. This went a bit longer because I was kind of watching the replays. I was like, yeah, let's just keep talking about this game. So yeah, Hydra Baneling's pretty cool. Check it out. Have some fun with it. There's definitely ways to play around carriers, even though they are pretty frustrating to play against sometimes. As the Protoss player, guys, remember to spread those adepts out. Don't just get wrecked by a few Banelings forcing all your adepts out of the fight like Stats did in that game one. Anyway, guys, I'll be back tomorrow with another daily. For now, thank you so much for hanging out. Don't forget to hug a watermelon, kick a walrus, and of course, punch a garden gnome to the moon. I'll catch you guys next time. Goodbye and good night.